And in this particular video, we're going to cover orientation to QGIS or QGIS using a data folder. And the data that we're going to be utilizing is both from Exercise 1 Spatial Data Models, which comes from the Discover QGIS book, and also the Natural Earth Quick Start Guide. So you'll have links to both those data sources. And as we download the data sources, what we want to do is we want to explore the interface of QGIS. And then for your assignment that you're going to turn in for credit, we're going to actually create just a simple state outline map. And it's going to be a very rudimentary map, but it will allow us to experiment with some of the data and how we work with data within QGIS. We're also going to take a look at the QGIS browser as a second component to QGIS desktop, and that will be utilized mostly in Exercise 1 Spatial Data Models. So to get started, we want to make sure that we download our data. And again, we're going to be using data from the Discover QGIS workbook. And we're also going to be utilizing Natural Earth Quick Start data, which is a pretty common open source data package that features a lot of data that's good for doing mapping at a global scale. So it's not what we would call particularly large scale data for the most part. It's more sort of medium scale and small scale data, but it's really good for setting up and understanding some of the functionality of QGIS because it's a pretty well organized data source. Okay, so to get started, you'll have links to the data folders, and as you download them, this is what they'll look like. And I'm going to place everything on the desktop so that we can see it. So the first one is the Part 1, Introduction to Geospatial Technology, and this is from the Discover QGIS book. And I have a link to that set up for you, and also the Natural Earth Quick Start. So if I just get into a browser and I quickly look for Natural Earth, this is where the data is coming from. So this is the site, and you can download it from this site as you would like to. And what's nice is that under the downloads page, it breaks this down, the downloads into large versus medium versus small scale mapping. And the large scale is at 1 to 10 million, which is not fantastically large scale. It's appropriate, so 1 inch equals about 160 miles. So if we wanted to make a map where 1 inch equaled 10 miles, this would probably not be the data source that we would want to use. But what's nice about this particular data source is that it has a kit, the Quick Start kit, and it's very well organized. It's easy for just getting started within QGIS. So this is the data that we're going to use, at least in the first part of the assignment. Okay, so the first thing we want to do in the first part of the assignment, part 1, is we want to understand these components of the actual interface, and they're 1 through 7. So we're going to go through that together. So let's go ahead, and first thing we have to do is we always have to extract the data from the zip folder. So we can see the little zip on the folder. If we just do a right click and say extract all, we can do that. The other option is that if you have 7-zip installed, which is something that you probably should do, it's an open source and free utility for zipping and unzipping files or compressing or uncompressing files. We could use either one. So I'm just going to say extract all, and then what it's going to do is it's going to extract that particular zip folder into its own folder. So if we click on the Natural Earth folder that's been unzipped, we can see inside packages, and then within packages is the actual data itself. And they have it organized here. There's a MXD file for ArcMap, which we're not going to be utilizing because we're not using ArcMap. And then there's also a Natural Earth Quick Start, QGIS project file that we're not going to utilize either. We're just going to go straight to these folders here. We could double click on this and actually open up a quick start, but we're not going to do that. The other alternative is to go straight into the data. And we can see that the data here is organized as 10M, 50M, and 110M. And what this is referring to is the scale of the data, what the scale is appropriate to. So if we're making what we would consider to be a small scale map, we might want to be using one of these larger 110 million feature folders because these are much more appropriate to mapping at a global scale. So we're not so interested in seeing the details of a particular country or a particular region. We're much more interested in getting sort of a global view of the whole Earth or all countries. This scale makes much more sense at 110 million. So if we want to be, say we want to map a region of the United States, maybe the Eastern Seaboard, the 10 million, which would be more appropriate. So for our exercise, we're going to be working in the 10 million cultural folder and also in the 50 million roster folder. Okay, so once we have the folders open, they're just kind of sitting there. So they're either going to be on a drive or they're going to be on your desktop. And we want to somehow see into these folders outside of just clicking on them and looking inside them. So there's 2 ways to do that with QGIS. One is to utilize the QGIS browser, which the second part of the assignment, which is exercise 1 spatial data models, covers in depth. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to open that up. So if I search QGIS, it's going to bring me to the desktop, but I can also go into the browser. So I'm just going to click on browser, open that up, and then just quickly take a look into these folders. So if I have it on one of my drives, say my C drive, I can look into it that way. So if I go into users, let's open it up here, go to my desktop, I can see the data here, and we can see the zip folder shows up as a white icon, and the folder itself shows up as a yellow icon. Okay, so if we open it up this way, we can take a look into, say, the cultural folder. And we can see all the data sitting here. And what it's doing here, there's actually more pieces of the data in the folder. It's just showing us the things that we would utilize in QGIS. So in this case, the 10 million cultural folder is filled with what are called vector features. And we can see the little icon here off to the left for a vector. It's this kind of gray blob. And everything ends with .shp, which is a shapefile extension. Okay. And if we go into the 50 million Raster folder, we can see that there is a status.txt, which we're not going to use. Here's what a raster icon looks like. So it literally looks like little pixelated cells in an image, and it's a .tif. And if we look at the metadata for this particular raster, we can see the pixels, we can see its bands. There's a lot of information here that in the class we'll get into what actually each one of these things means. But for right now, just know that under metadata is where you could actually find out information about that particular feature if you wanted to have that information. So the browser doesn't do much besides just letting us see into our data or see what's actually inside of a folder. And what's nice about it is it's a good way to just preview the data before we actually bring it into QGIS. So let's do this. Let's close up the browser since we've kind of taken a look at what's in our Natural Quick Start folder. And let's, before we go too much farther here, let's make a new folder called C1_A1. Okay, you can see I've made that folder here. So if I just did a right click and I said new folder, I've already made it. It's just an empty folder. I want you to make this folder so that you have a place to put your final features for your assignment turn in. We're going to be making a very simple map of a state, United States state, on a raster, on the 50 million raster from Natural Earth. And we're going to label it with the name of the state, and we're going to have the outline. We're not actually going to fill it with a color. We're just going to have an outline. So I'll show that in just a second also. But we need to create a folder that's separate from the data folders here. I mean, we could easily put this inside those folders and it would be fine. But here, let's just keep it separate. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to actually open up QGIS. So I have it sitting over here pinned to my taskbar. If you want to get to it, I'm on a Windows machine, obviously. So if you're in Mac, you're going to be going into applications and getting the application there. So let's just open up the desktop. And so we're on 2.18. It's going to open up here. And as it opens up, it's going to give you a tip. You can see that it gives you a QGIS tip here. And these are kind of helpful as you're getting started with the software. So I would recommend keeping these tips going until they just become really annoying and not as useful anymore for you. But until they do, just keep them on because they give you nice little tips to learn the software. So in this case, it's talking about using the mouse scroll wheel and how to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to say OK to get rid of that. And you can see that before I made this video, I had a test set up, and that was one of my recent projects. And that's not what I want to actually use. So I want to, if you want to just make a blank new canvas, you can go up to Project and say New. And it gives you a brand new window here. Your particular interface may look different. And we want to talk about how to customize the interface according to those 7 features that we looked at before. So the 7 things we have to go through here is the menu bar, the main toolbar, managing layer toolbars, the browser panel, the layers panel, the map canvas itself, and the status bar. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about is the menus bar. So if we go back to our diagram here, this is the menus bar up at the top. That's number 1. Okay, so if we come over here, we can see project, edit, view, layer, settings. These are all the project menus. And these are, you click on these and then you have access into many different features. Okay, so we'll be accessing this main menu bar quite a bit. So the second thing is what we call the main toolbar area. So the main toolbar area, you can dock these toolbars. Okay, you can bring toolbars in, you can move them around, but they kind of sit up in the top here. and you can organize the space how you want to. Okay, so that's where you're going to be utilizing a lot of specific tools to working with the actual, what we call the map canvas here. So the third thing that we want to pay attention to is what we call the layers toolbar, okay, which is off to the left-hand side here. This is the layers toolbar. So we can get rid of it here. Let's see if we can, oh, here it is. So we can pull this out if we want to. I'm just going to dock it over to the side here. And the very first dialog it has is add a vector layer, add a raster layer. And then these are different. We'll get into all the other options down here as we move along in the class. But these two are really critical, adding a vector and adding a raster layer. So this is a very important toolbar that you usually keep as a default. You keep that upright and standing. I usually keep it right there on the left-hand side. And then we also have a layers panel. So the browser panel and the layers panel are important to understand. So that's going to be number 5 and number 4. And you can see right now in my default setting here, all I have is a layers panel. And if I click on it, it's going to go away. Now to get this back, what I can do is I can go up to View, Panels, and click on Browser Panel. Okay, so that brings the browser panel. It looks very much like the QGIS browser itself. Okay, so the browser panel is something that would replicate that original browser that we previewed at the very start of the video. I'm not going to use that for right now. I'm just going to click out of that. The really critical one from my perspective is to have the layers panel. So I'm going to go down to Panel, keep missing it here, Panel, and go to the layers panel itself. And this is really important because we're going to see our layers stacked up as we bring them into QGIS. Number 6 is the map canvas itself. So this is the working space, and it's blank right now. It's absolutely white, and we want to make it more exciting. So to do that, we're going to actually bring data into the GIS, and we'll cover that in just a second. And the last thing we want to talk about is what we call the status bar down here on the bottom. And for the status bar, we can see what are called coordinate systems. We can also see kind of where we are within the coordinate space. And importantly, we have what's called a scale tool that's located right here. Once we know those 7 components, we have a pretty fundamental understanding of where things are generally within the interface itself. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually bring in some data. And we want to be aware that we are also going to be using the C1A1 folder here in just a moment. Okay, so the first thing that we can do is we can go into, we want to bring in a vector first. So a vector, add a vector layer. This is one of several ways to bring in data into QGIS. So we could do it through the browser panel if we want to. We can also do it this way. So if we click on add a vector, we're going to have the source type be file. The encodings, you have different options here. The default is okay for now what we're doing. And the data set, if we browse to the data set, we're going to point it to, in this case, I'm on the desktop. So I'm going to point it to my desktop. And I'm going to be utilizing the Natural Earth Quick Start folder because this is the data that we're going to utilize as the source for the assignment turn-in. So I'm going to go into this folder, and we're going to be utilizing 2 things. We're going to be utilizing the raster as a base. So let's get the raster first. So we go into 50 million, and we can see that it doesn't look like there's anything here. And the reason is because we're trying to bring in a vector at this point in time. And this is the wrong tool to be bringing in that vector. Okay, we want to actually be bringing in a raster at this point in time. So what I'm going to do, that's a common problem, is you're looking for a raster and you're in the vector add tool. So that's obviously not going to work. And so just remember, if you are not seeing anything showing up here and you also use your file extension search over here on the right hand side and nothing's coming up, you need to back up for a second. Okay, so if we go into the raster, we need to be utilizing this tool right underneath. So let's back up all the way, and let's get, instead of our raster, let's get our vector feature, and that's under our 10 million cultural package. So we double click on that, and what we're looking for here is we can specify what it is that we want to bring into QGIS. In this case, we want it to be an Esri shapefile because that's the file types that are provided by Natural Earth, and a lot of data is going to come in an Esri shapefile. And okay, so we're gonna click on Esri shapefile, and then here are all the shapes that we actually have available to us. If we just, let's cancel for just a second. If we come outside and we look at the folder itself, and we go into the 10 million cultural, we can see that there's many more file components. So what the window's doing within QGIS is it's limiting it to this one particular file, which is called a .shp, and it just is assuming that all the supporting files that go along with a .shp It's just assuming that those are going to come into the system also, but it's not allowing us to preview those. Okay, so if we look at the folder, the raw data as it is, we can see that we have DBFs and PRJs. We'll get into what those are as we go along in the class. But for right now, what we need is we need to always, when we're bringing in a vector, let QGIS actually see the performative element, the thing that's going to show up in QGIS. In this case, with Esri shapefiles, it's going to be .shp. Okay, so just remember, we have a bunch of files here. They seem kind of unorganized, or they don't really make a lot of sense without understanding what each one of these are. But as soon as we go into QGIS and we open it up and we go to add vector feature, and we tell it where the data is located, so it's desktop, natural earth. When we go into cultural and we tell it, you need to be an Esri shapefile, it's only going to see the .shps, and that makes it easier actually, because then we're not trying to navigate through a bunch of files that aren't going to be performative anyhow within QGIS. It's just allowing us access to those files that really, quote, work within QGIS. Okay, so the one that we need here is the admin1 for states. Okay, so I've got to make sure that I'm getting the right one. So this is states and provinces, admin1. Now, admin0 is a different level of administrative human boundary. We want to have, for this particular project, we want to be using the states. And we don't want to use the lines. We want to just use the one that's called admin_1 states provinces, because these are what are called polygons. And if we hover over it, we can see it's 20 megabytes. And it was just recently, well, I modified it. So we can see the date that it's been changed, or it's been utilized, which is 1/19/2018 in my case. That's what I downloaded it. Okay, so I'm going to click on this and say open, and open. And here's all our administrative boundaries at admin level 1. So admin level 1 is basically states. So if we kind of zoom in, I'm using my scroll, my mouse scroll, coming in, coming back out. Okay, that's one way to get around it. We can also go up here on the main toolbar up at the top here, and we can use our pointer tool, and this will kind of allow us to zoom around in the map space. We can also snap it to its full extent, pan map to a selection. If we have something selected, we can bring it to that selection. We can also go out all the way. So this brings it to the full extent. This particular tool up here, this magnifying tool, zoom full. Then there's also a minus, which will zoom out. You can see it quickly disappears, so we got to be careful. We can also take a zoom tool, click on it, do a left click, and pull it down over our feature. And that brings us into the feature also. So this is oftentimes how I do it. I get over the particular feature that I'm interested in, and then just kind of operate it like this to get it just exactly how I want it. Okay, so I'm going to snap back out all the way, and then I'm just going to bring into focus the United States. Okay, that's pretty good. So we can see the US. And what we want to do now is we want to start preparing our data for the actual assignment turn-in. So what we want to do is we want to select just one US state to be separate from the larger file here. And the way that we do this, and this is not part of the assignment text, this is kind of something that we're going to do separate of the assignment text, is we need to make a selection. And there's a few ways to make selections, but probably the one that's the easiest is up here on the toolbar, there is a yellow box. And if we just come down a little bit, it'll say select features by polygon, or just select features. If I just click on select features, I can just click on the inside of one of these states, and it's going to make it a bright yellow color. So I'm going to use Texas as the example. So if I click on Texas, it's active now, and it's considered to be selected. And once it's selected, it means that it's in a different state than the rest of the data. And if we come over here and do a right click on top of the data, and then say open attribute table, it has one feature, okay, show all features, and only show selected features. If I click on show selected features, it's going to bring me to what I have selected right now. So we can see the actual attributes, the table data for this particular feature. And in this feature, it has a name. It says it's in the United States. It has a lat long, the center of the actual state. It has some ID numbers. It tells you what the scale rank is. So it has a fair amount of data, and it also has a Wikipedia link, and it has a code 3536. Okay, so all those things can be useful. So what we want to do now is we want to isolate this particular state from the larger file. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do a right click, and then we're going to go down to save as. And as we do that, it says save the vector layer as. We're going to save it in the shapefile format. We're going to point it to now our class 1 assignment folder. So we're going to go to browse, and under browse, I'm going to go to desktop. And you might be putting this somewhere else. So I'm utilizing the desktop just to make things clear and simple here, but you might want to be on one of your drives. One recommendation, important recommendation, is do not be working on drives that are connected to the hard drive for anything that's memory intensive. Okay, so if you have a USB stick or you have an external drive on your computer, you want to make sure that you're working off the actual hard drive itself, because when we start getting into larger files and we're really exercising the computer's memory, we don't want to have to go process to an external drive. We want to have everything operating within the hard drive itself. It'll speed things up. We won't have as many errors. Okay, so that's just kind of a quick tip, is stay off the external drives while you're actually processing within QGIS. When you want to take your work somewhere else, certainly you can finish your working session and then put it onto an external drive and take it with you. That's perfectly fine. So what we want to do here is we want to find the location that we want to place our shapefile. In this case, we want to place it within the C1A1 folder. Okay, and we're just going to now tell it, let's call it Texas. So we'll just call it the state name, whatever your state that you're interested in producing for this assignment. I'm going to use Texas as example. You can use Texas if you want to. And I'm just going to put in the file name. That's all I'm going to do. And then just say save. Okay, it hasn't saved it yet. It's just saying that here's the path that it's going to save it on. Now the trick is that I want to save only selected features. I want to click that on. So if I were to save it right now, it's going to save everything. And I don't want that. I want to save only Texas. So I click that on. And I'm going to add the saved file to the map. Okay, that's okay. I'll do that. And then I'll just go ahead and say OK. And here it is. So now what I can do is get rid of my original states. I can remove that. Say OK. There's Texas. Okay, so, and we can also come out here to the folder, and we can see that we have a shapefile, .shp. That's the performative file that QGIS is looking for. But look at all the things that it has. It has a what's called a PRJ, which is a projection file. It's got a DBF, which is the attribute data itself. It's got a .shx, which is index helper to kind of match the feature that we see in QGIS, the purple feature, with the actual attribute data. So there's a lot of things going on out here in the folder, and all we're seeing is just this thing within QGIS that says Texas. So just remember that there's a lot of things going on outside in the folder that are required to make everything work within QGIS, but when we're inside of QGIS, we're only looking at the .shp, or the shapefile itself. All right, so all good. We actually have exported out a feature. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure before we go too much farther that we actually save our project. And there's a couple ways to do this. We can save it within, if we're making a map and create a composed map, we can save it then, or we can just save it now. So if I go to project and I go ahead and say save as, and then go into my folder, I can save it here. So I'm just going to call this C1 class 1 A1 assignment 1, and then I can go ahead and say save. And then let's go look in the folder. So there it is. Okay, so if I ever want to get back to the exact state that I'm in QGIS right now, all I have to do is just double click on this particular C1A1 project, QGIS project, and it's going to bring everything back in. It's going to bring in Texas just as we're looking at it right now. So as you're going along, you can just do a file save, file save, file save as you're building up your work, you're building up your working process, and it'll save your particular instance at that particular time. And sometimes you want to save these projects at different states. So you might want to say something like C1A1 draft and then C1A1 final when you get to the actual final state of your working. All right, so let's go back here. Now what we want to do is to produce this map, we want to just have an outline, not a color fill. So to do that, and your assignment covers how to do this. It's going to be under styles, but it's not going to be this styles button right here. If we go to properties, so we do a right click on the feature and get down to properties. Let me do that again. So if I go here, do a right click and go to properties. Under properties, here's all the things that I can do with this particular layer, not the whole QGIS working environment, just the particular layer itself. Remember, I'm in Texas right now. I've done a right click on Texas and I've opened up this particular window. So here, we want to make this transparent. Okay, so right now it's a color fill. Okay, and there's lots of different things I can do. This is a whole world of styling, and to get good at this just takes practice. But the first thing we want to do is we want to just click on simple style instead of simple fill here. We want to, instead of it be style under fill style, we want to say no brush. Okay, and that just gives us an empty feature now. So if I say apply, okay, and come back, now I just have an outline. If you want to make this, let's zoom in a little bit here. So I'm going to use my zoom tool so I can see it better. If we want to make the edging a little bit more exciting than just a simple black line, what we can do is go back to properties and go back to style in here, what we can do is go into, I'm going to double click on this on the fill itself. Remember, we're not dealing with a fill here. We have no brush on, but we do have a solid line. We can make it a dashed line if we want to, which is kind of cool. You might want to experiment with this a little bit. So actually, let me make it a dashed line. And then the outline width, it's not particularly thick right now. It's just a 0.2. If I want to make this 1, I would just, under the outline width, I would just put 1 and then say apply and OK. And you can see it becomes much thicker. So this is actually a little bit too thick. You can see that we get some down here at the bottom of Texas. It starts to kind of muddle up a little bit. So let me go back there. And I'm going to make it 0.5, I think, is the width that I would like. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to click on Simple Fill, Dashed Line. And under my dashed line, instead of being 1, I'm going to have it be 0.5. I think that's probably better. I'll say OK. That looks good. I like that. So now what I might want to do is go to Project and Save. And that's going to update it, that particular saved QGIS project, to the actual working point that I'm at right now. It's going to save everything about this working environment up to this particular point. Now, the requirement for the assignment is to produce a state that's going to have a label. I'm going to let you do the label on yourself. But once again, you go to Texas and go to Properties. And here you get to your labels. So I'm going to let you do the labeling as you want. So you want it to say Texas or the abbreviation of Texas, and you want to use a font that's going to be the appropriate size, and it's going to look good with, it's going to be very legible, and at the scale that you're mapping at, it's going to be attractive. So you'll do that here. I'm not going to cover that right now. But what we do want to do is we want to bring in that raster base. So right now we just have a blank canvas that's very boring, and we want to actually bring in a base that's going to give us some context. And we're going to use the 50 million TIFF. And to get to that, what we do is go click on the raster, and we go back to Natural Earth Quick Start, 50 million raster base. Click on that folder. And we want to be looking for, this is in what's called a TIFF format.tif, and that's basically a geotiff. So if we look for JPEGs, it's not going to see it. So we need to kind of know what it is that we're looking for. In this case, it's a .tif. And TIFFs, we could also say all files, and it's going to find it. But we want to specify it as a geotiff. And you can see it's .tif, .tiff. That's a geotiff. And that's what that guy is. So I'm going to make it a geotiff, and then I'm going to see it here. I'm just going to click on it once and say open. And it comes in on top of Texas, which is not so good. So we want to come over here and just push Texas on top. And there it is. So this is pretty good, actually, right here. This is very close to what we want as the turn-in. There's one thing that we need to be aware of, and that is that we don't want to be too close or too far away. This particular feature, which is, or I shouldn't say feature, this particular raster is meant to be displayed at 50 million. So right now we're much closer in scale, where our scale is 1 map unit to, looks like about 4 million. Now if I make this that 4 down at the bottom here, let me bring it up just a little bit so you can see it better. If I bring my scale, it's 1 to about 5 million, and I put in a 0 here, that's the scale that it really wants to be seen at, right? So anything that is going to be, quote, larger scale than this, let's bring it to, let's say 20 million, 1 to 20 million. It's starting to, quote, pixelate, okay? As we'll start to see as we get smaller, down to 10 million, that we kind of, let's go down to 5 million. Make that a 5. We can start to see the pixelation taking place. Let's actually go down to 2 million. This is what we don't want. At this scale where we can actually see the pixels themselves, that's not going to make a very attractive map. It's not, this raster isn't meant to be displayed at that particular level. So as a compromise, I suggest you make your maps for the states between, say, 10 million and 20 million is probably about right. You could bring it down even to maybe, let's try 5 and see what we get. 5 is probably a little too large scale. I might bring it to 8. 8 looks pretty good for Texas. So in between, let's say in between 8 and 15 million is probably where you want to be in terms of scale. And you can change in this particular map canvas down at the bottom the scale itself. And you can do it 2 ways. You can just pop in numbers down here at the bottom, or you can use this little interactive here. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it right about that scale right now. The other option is that you can come up and use your zoom tools and just kind of massage it to get it right at the scale that you want it to be. It's a little close for my taste. I'm going to bring it back down to 5. Okay, so once you get to this point, then you probably want to save it, go project save. And then what we want to do is we want to actually print this, and we need to utilize what's called the Map Composer or Map Composer window to do that. That's off the main toolbar tool set up here at the top, and it's this one right here. It's a blank page, and it has a little yellow kind of spindle icon off to the right-hand side. So I'm going to say new print composer, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call this one C1A1 for our first assignment, and say OK. And it gives us a blank page. And we want to set up some basic parameters here. So under composition, you need to make a choice. Is your state more a landscape, or is it more of a portrait? So those states that are kind of skinny and standing up tall, quote, standing up tall, you might want to choose portrait. For Texas, I probably would do best with a landscape page. So I'm going to make this landscape. So the orientation is landscape as opposed to portrait. And my preset, let's just make them at 8.5 by 11 for this first assignment. So we're going to go to 8.5 by 11. So that's ANSIA. Okay, so that's my page size is 8.5 by 11. It's landscape. If I scroll down, it's going to tell me that the export resolution is 300 dots per inch, which is a pretty high print resolution. That's fine for this assignment. We'll keep it at 300 dpi. Keep everything else as a default. And under Composer, we can save the project. Okay, and that just updates our original save that we did in the QGIS desktop window. And now what we want to do is we have all our parameters set up. So if we ever wanted to come back, we're going to be able to get into this particular map and at this page size. But what we don't have right now is we don't actually have the map itself. And to add that in, we're going to make this first project what's called a full bleed. And a full bleed is when you actually bring the full map space out to the very edge of the page. So there's no white space on the edge. I'm going to show you how to do that. You come over here to this main toolbar off to the left, and it's this tool right here. It says Add New Map. We click on that, and I'm just going to come, actually, let's go on the inside and leave a little space. So there it is. If I were to print it now, it's going to give me a little space, a little edging. For this assignment, what we can do is just come right over the edge. And this is going to give you what's called a full bleed. So there's not going to be any space on the edging. And that's fine for this assignment. And if I like the scale of this looks pretty good. I might bring it down to 1 to maybe 7 million, because you can see on this side I'm getting a little bit of pixelation and it doesn't look all that great. So let's change the scale. We can do it, we can actually do it here under item properties. This is the current scale. So let's bring it out to 7. I think 7 is probably better for me for this particular map. It's going to be a choice that you're going to have to make. And it's not particularly centered right now, so I might want Texas to come up just a little bit. And to do that, what I can do is I can move item content, and you can see it comes up just a little bit. So that can help you center your page just exactly how you want it. So that's pretty good. I like that maybe just a little bit more. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save the composer, and then I'm going to export this out. Now, your final export should look something like this, but remember, you're going to have a label that you place on the actual state itself. So you're not completely done yet. You're going to have to do that step, and I'm not going to cover that step in this video. You're going to do that on your own. So I'm going to go to Composer now, and I'm going to export the PDF. So say Export PDF. I'm going to go down to Desktop, go into C1A1, and I'm going to have it as a PDF. That's what we're going to be submitting to the assignment section, is a PDF map. I'm just going to call this C1 underscore A1, and then I'll have my last name. Your last name's fine, METTS for me, and then go ahead and say save. And it'll take a second, and then what I can do is I can just collapse the windows and go take a look and see if it's what I want. So here it looks like it's about, it's 1851 KB, which is perfectly fine size-wise, and I'm going to double-click this, and there's my map. So this is what I'll actually be turning in. And it's a full bleed, so we don't see any white page space. We just see the map itself, and that's kind of what we want for this particular assignment. So this will be our turn-in, and this will get us through the basic components of producing a map within QGIS, saving the actual project itself, working with a vector feature that we've extracted or we've pulled out of a larger shapefile, and then also bringing in a raster into our working environment. We've also worked a bit with scale, which is a really important mapping concept. We'll talk in the future about how to really get very exacting in terms of our scale. We've talked about zooming in and out of the map space. Definitely make sure that you practice and get real familiar with your zoom tools. We also talked about under View, if you lose a panel or need a new panel, you can go down to View, Panels, and bring those in. Okay, same thing with toolbars. You can bring more toolbars in here. But View is really important when you're first starting with QGIS to kind of customize your space and get it to be the working environment that you want. So hopefully this video is helpful in getting you set up to actually do the assignment turn-in itself. but also previewing the first part of the exercise, which is working with natural earth, and then also the second part of the exercise that we didn't really get into, which is the spatial data models. And that you're just looking at the other data set, which is part 1 intro, and it's the exercise data 1. So here we're looking at Hawaii. So you're going to have a state routes, like a roads feature, public schools. There's a Landsat, which is a .jpeg. This is a raster file. You also have Hawaii counties. And up here at the top, this hill, that's standing for, in this particular folder here, you have a, I believe it's a DEM of Hawaii that actually has elevation raster that you can preview and utilize within QGIS.